morning. My name is Jim Fagan. I am the Director of Global Platforms for Telstra, and that is in our product group. So first off, though, I'd like to just do an apology in advance if my voice gets a little bit scratchy. I went to undergrad at Villanova University, so I spent the entire weekend in San Antonio screaming at basketball games. So I'm still a little bit rough, but it was a good result, so I'm pretty pleased with that. But yeah, so I head up our global products for in platforms for Telstra, and really what that is so just to give a bit of background on the slides coming up, because I think it's a bit about, I want to talk a little bit about transforming in a carrier, right? So how do we actually move to an automated world? It's quite different from the way we operate, and the reason why my title is platforms is we've actually about 2 years ago changed our product organization from silos, focused on strict product sets, into more of a horizontal structure. So what's in our platform group is our cloud business, end-to-end, which we actually use really a multi-cloud at this point. So really, how do we actually leverage some of the hyperscaler clouds? And then also our software-defined networking capability, which is the Telstra Programmable Network. So we have a fully automated, homegrown, globally available software-defined network that we call the Telstra Programmable Network, which has actually been around from its bones for about 4 to 5 years. But the last 2 years is when we've really started to advance it and bring it to market. And currently, that really is our kind of first step into automating the network for Telstra. And the reason why we actually put those together is because if you look at the automation aspect, it's really cloud that's actually gotten us to where to this starting point. So if you think about not just, but the aspect of what cloud is, but just what it's actually created. And it's not, so if you think about cloud 10, 15 years ago, probably 10, really the big advantage of it was just that it was the start of, hey, you know what, I can actually get some cheap compute, cheap storage, pretty much it's anywhere, it's available, I can build what I want on it. And that was really the first use case, and that's kind of what everyone thought was the idea, right? I can spin up servers, I can put storage, I can manage my costs, and that was the big jump point. But if you actually look forward to, fast forward 10 years from now, obviously there's a lot of application stuff that were built on top of it, but I think one of the interesting things is processes and what's developed out of what cloud has allowed. So if you think about this, right, the whole idea of DevOps came about on how you actually manage stuff in a cloud environment. And you think about now automation, everything's talk about DevOps. The whole idea of continuous integration, continuous deployment came out of a cloud model. And so if you look now at the network aspect and you think through it, the network doesn't behave like a cloud at all. It's not available everywhere, anywhere when you need it. There's not the capability of basically having unlimited bandwidth if you need it. There's not a pay-as-you-go model for the most part. So if you look at where the network is right now in the building blocks, it's actually quite a bit behind. And as you go through and you think through digital transformation, which is obviously one of the big buzzwords of today, and the reality is if you really go through it, without the network, without really having a fully automated network, you're not going to realize the potential of digital transformation, because everything is about interconnection. You think of any of the new trends, I have a slide on some of the Gartner trends that if we get it up, but I think you all know them, whether it's cloud at the edge, IoT, blockchain, mesh, all of that 5G, all of that requires networking. And without the network fundamentally changing and automating, we're going to actually miss out on those future advances. And so, the one thing that I really enjoy when you think through it is, the example that everybody uses when they try to justify 5G edge and IoT. And the one use case, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard of it, is the whole idea with autonomous cars. So it's the concept that the car's out there, it needs to automatically process something. Oh, great, I got my slides up so I can kind of at least go through with a guide. Let's see if this works. There we go. So as I was saying, these are kind of, if you look at some of these trends, right? And each one of these on their own have an ability to actually really, kind of transform the way we work, the way we live. But really the idea is all these are supposed to work together. And that's where I'm going to go with this example on the driverless car, on the autonomous car. So your idea is that basically that car's out there, it needs to make a decision. It wants to hit a cell tower that's got extra storage and compute to actually know what it needs to do for that process, and that needs to be, obviously latency and everything else is of massive importance in that. So if you think about the way we're structured today, that's just is not going to happen. You're talking about where you're going to actually need to have the ability to actually have that fully connected. You're going to have that bandwidth, whether it's from that 5G in the car or whether it's actually from the fix that's coming from the base station back into the cloud. Then that actually, the network is going to need to be able to actually to respond and actually be able to intelligently understand what's coming across, drop those packets off and workloads in the right area, whether that's to process in the cell tower, back at the edge, back at the cloud, get that information, and then deliver it back within a certain amount of time. And networks like today just don't work like that. And if you think about particularly a carrier that's going to end up being very responsible for that in a 5G world, that's not the way our core network's been set. You saw a couple of the earlier presentations on the journey that we're at. So really, that's what we're trying to unlock when we talk about network automation. So to think about taking network back into kind of comparing it to a cloud, what you're really trying to do with it is give it those same characteristics, where if you think about in a perfect world, App A talks to App B, and this is where my network engineering colleagues get upset with me, so I do say it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, but you don't have to worry about the network anymore. It is just there. The network behaves the way the applications tell it to behave. The applications are actually now controlling the network, and those network characteristics, or slices, which is why slicing is an important thing, are just available to actually create those worlds. So if you think about the way we think about Telstra, particularly on the product side of it, and I'll go through a bit of what we're doing to automate our core, is we almost want to make the network, to use again a cloud term, serverless. So we want it where really applications or tasks are dictating the control to the network. So it's really infrastructure as a code, but on the network. And that's really, I think, when you get to that is where you unlock it. And I think, one of the things then as you start going through this journey is, and I mentioned about the missing link for digitally transforming is why are you doing it? So obviously it's to unlock that potential. But if you go back and you look in your organization, or if you look at any organization, even if it's a greenfield one, there's a lot of places you can start. And there's a lot of different reasons on why you can go on this journey and what it is. So at Telstra, we kind of look at it from obviously we try to start with the customer. So we think if we can create this automated network of the future, that we do unlock digital transformation for them. We do create that foundation for customers to apply their businesses on top of the network and basically come up with some of those creative solutions that I spoke about, right? So not us trying to dictate, hey, you have a network that can do these 3 things for you. Basically, you have a network that can do a lot for you. Here's the tool sets. Here's how you use it. Go create your business on top of it. So how do we actually give them the tool sets to go empower the network and go actually drive that change? And then obviously, there's the part where you then look internally as well for network performance. Obviously, there's a big customer aspect for that, particularly when you're talking about those use cases that I mentioned that are out there where literally if that connection goes down, I wasn't going to go down this route, but after that plane one, I don't think I can go much lower. Someone might get injured or hurt. So in a good, so you start to get some real performance aspects there that are massively important. But then if you think about this idea, right, and again, everyone talks about automating the network and everything goes away. But for all of us that are in the industry, these are not even from the legacy from the new systems. These are expensive. This is stuff in the ground. This is data centers full of compute and storage. So how do you actually get that idea of network ubiquity in a cost model that makes sense? And this is where you start to stack in the machine learning and the AI. So how do I kind of lay that base foundation? How do I actually understand what these applications are doing to my network, and how am I able to deliver that experience with the best possible outcome for the customer, but also at the right cost points? And then again, when you think about cloud or any of those global trends I put up with blockchain and the mesh and everything else, it doesn't matter. You could be a 20-person SMB. You're doing stuff globally. You're either hitting resources globally. So everything needs to be globally connected. And again, if you look at where we are early in this stage, this is where, James mentioned earlier about the TM forum and some of these other things that are out there. No carrier, even no OTT, is going to go build a network around the world. So as everyone goes on their automation journey, how do these networks talk to each other? How does this actually become globally connected? So these are some of the challenges that we're thinking about as we go through. And then really the cost aspect as well, as I mentioned, is it's, the network, if you look at any of these charts, even if you just take it at its base, if you look at any of the charts, whether it's from Gartner, or whether it's from whoever you want to see that's doing the telegeography, et cetera, the data usage is going to go through the roof. So even if we have to automate just to even be able to keep up with that, much less kind of provide the building blocks for that future. So really that's how, as we go through to Telstra, this is kind of the areas that we look to solve when we do our prioritization and our decision-making experience, and then also thinking about a full value chain end to end and how we actually segue these in together. So if you look at it, and James had a bit of a slide earlier, right? So this is the challenges that we're grappling with, right? So if you look at the world today, as I said, this is to me always kind of, when you kind of go from that future state of basically the network acting serverless to, where we are, and it says yesterday, but the reality is it's today. This is where we sit. It's fixed bandwidth, it's contracts, it's 20 days to go deliver. It's you trying to predict what your application is going to do and behave, or what that site's going to do for the next 3 years and putting it together. And then when that comes into us, that really goes into, if you look at all of our legacy OSS, BSS stacks, that goes through a lot of, I'll call it to be kind, spaghetti processes to get that done. And the reality is it needs to behave like cloud. So, with this slide for our programmable network, those are actually the characteristics that we have put in for certain, certain base level, particularly for cloud connectivity. We allow customers to come in and actually do bandwidth anywhere from 1 meg to 10 gig. That'll be 100 gig in the next 3 months. We actually allow them to basically draw out their network and pick their virtual network functions and actually insert them and use them for the time. We will spin up a configuration in that bandwidth anywhere into any of the major clouds around the world in less than 2 minutes. And we actually allow customers to pay for the use down by the hour. So that's just a starting building block. But I think it's really important when you come back and you think about this, is these foundations, and then what is that customer experience? What are you driving it for? Because it's so easy to get caught in kind of the coolness of the technology versus what's the outcome you're delivering. So let me just kind of talk to you then how we're thinking about this, right? Because that sounds really easy when you look at those building block slides, and it kind of makes sense. And so what we ended up doing, and I'll get into a bit of it more in a bit, is our programmable network. That was a greenfield, customer-facing, software-defined networking, so a bit separated from our core. We obviously integrate back into our network. That's where we can get our capacity. That's where we get some of our advantages. That's where we get our telemetry from. But as we look to really get and unlock that vision that I spoke about at the beginning of the talk, and I think from a lot of the stuff you're going to hear today, we as a company have really gone on a really 3-year journey right now that we've started to go through this. So that first piece is really what we call Network 2020, so our network of the future. And that is a multi-billion-dollar investment to really virtualize our core, if you want to call it that. And I think one of the interesting things when you look at that investment program is you would think that's all just throwing a ton of software engineers at the problem and getting your network engineers trained up and moving new equipment and making the decisions on white boxes, et cetera. But a lot of this, again, is, we've ridden these legacy networks so hard, and they've done great work for us. We've kind of sweated the assets. You'd be amazed about how much of that work for us in Australia and that cost is collapsing exchanges. So I believe we're going to go from a few hundred exchanges in Australia at the end of it down to 40 or 50, putting in new fiber to handle this. So there's even an infrastructure component that has to go in to kind of support these new networks. So that's a really interesting piece of it. And then with that, we have a digitization automation program that we have about $1 billion investment in, which again is how do we actually get those manual touches and those processes out. We've started some of that with the bots that we've used in our call centers. But it's really that idea of how do we actually get those customer touches down and get them as digital as possible. And then what's the investment in new systems, what's in our processes, and how do we go that? And that ties into our Edge program, which again this is where we're really trying to go to the point of it's amazing. We have 1,500 different IT systems that we run. So how do we actually take that down to 200? How do we actually utilize cloud-based services across our entire value chain? Whether it's from prospect all the way to billing, all the way to service assurance. And then the big piece of it is quite honestly, is the people. This is a bit of a transformation. This is an area where we are getting software engineering teams. We are doing development. If you look at my product organization, I have a software development team of over 100 people. And we actually run that programmable network in a fully DevOps model. So the only where we plug back into the system is obviously if a customer has an outage, has a problem, we have to go through our communication systems to go through that. But we handle it all out of that 100 software person team. And obviously we have connections back in the core networking because you have to, because sometimes it's because literally a switch went down or there was a fiber cut, et cetera, the usual stuff. But how do you actually get that many people to go through a transformation journey like this? How do you go from, even if you think back to how, maybe a lot of you too, if you're in large organizations, you do business cases. Business cases were all tied to an 18-month waterfall that you could really tie out. Here's my investment, and then in 24 months, I'll launch XYZ product or service or cost reduction that will do this. When you're going with a vision slide, like I showed earlier, which was honestly one of the early vision slides we had when we launched the programmable network back in its former life when it was at PACnet, when you're going, I'm pretty sure I can get there, I'm pretty sure I can have a revenue stream of X millions within a year, I'm going to have a few of these characteristics, but I can't really tell you yet exactly what it's going to look like. That's a really different business conversation, and that provides trust from your board level and everyone else that you're on the right journey. And then if you think about this, these have all become massive programs on their own because they are massive transformations, but every single one of these overlaps with each other. So how do you keep them coordinated? How do you make sure you actually kind of have that North Star on what you're trying to drive for? And so really, we've gotten some learnings out of this. And again, this is really interesting about, some of the stuff. It seems pretty easy, but when you actually get back into actually doing it during the day, it gets a bit more difficult, right? So, as I mentioned, we started with the greenfield with the programmable network. That's a completely. We actually even have our own home-built OpenFlow controller, which we've actually open sourced called OpenKilda. If anyone's interested in software, you can go to the Apache Foundation and look at it. So that's our own controller. We actually run that control and data plane in hyperscaler clouds. We use white box switching. So it was very greenfield, very test dev that we've actually been able to scale out. And then obviously by going with that route, we're now running into some challenges as we industrialize that. But at least we now have a foundation. So that's that kind of start small, get it right, and then now we're kind of figuring out where we want to go and what we want to pivot for. And then when you start really looking back into your organization, and again, I'm taking this from Telstra, from a large carrier perspective, and I love this one because it really is funny. It's kind of and it's a struggle that I deal with every day when I go back into some of our other organizations is that standardization. We are so good at wanting to build every single corner case for every single use case. And the reality is if you're going to go into an automated world, it just can't be that. It has to be based on principles. It has to be on stuff that's going to solve 80, 90% of the problems, and that you can standard, you can automate, and you can scale. And so with that, with all those programs, one of the things that we're actually doing in our global products org right now, and it's interesting too as we go through it, it's a bit of a loose definition, but we have some 600 some odd discrete products that are still in services, and some probably overlap. They're just different classes of an EPL, et cetera. But what we're having to do with that is go through that for those programs and make decisions on, is this a product that we just ride out and sunset? Is this something that we actually need to lift and shift into those new platforms? And if we do, what are the trade-offs? Are these the ones that we actually want to refactor? And then where do all those customers land? Where do they move to? How do we actually align the sales teams with that? How do we actually align the back-end support? So it really is that process of understanding what you want to deliver and how you standardize as much as that is possible. Because if you end up, there's a big worry, and it's one of the ones that I always worry about, is what we're basically going to do is just kind of recreate the past. But we're going to say we did it in cloud. And instead of having engineering teams, we have DevOps teams. And we're going to feel really good about ourselves, but we're not going to have changed anything. So you really have to go back and address these fundamental questions as you go through it. And as I mentioned, right, and then for us is where we look at it, like right now in our programmable network, and I'll show you how we do some of that stuff, particularly with automation into cloud, we've really advanced a lot of different use cases and application use cases for our customers, but really it's unlocking the core. The core network has to be automated all the way through. That's when you can then really start applying machine learning AI tools and really get the value out of it. So the way we look at it as well is really, again, this is, if you do think about it, it's kind of really a bit of your stack. This is kind of your standard stack that you look at today. And cloud automation is actually, it's there, right? And that's in both private and public. The hyperscalers kind of all have gone from the, 3 years ago, if you went to them and told them that there would be a multi-cloud or a hybrid cloud world, they would all actually laugh at you and say, no, my cloud's going to dominate the world. But if you look at it, they've all adopted it. Everyone's come out with both on-prem, off-prem, type solutions that interact with each other that are automated. The idea that you get it pushed out to the edge, with edge computing now. But again, I go back to it, the network doesn't do that. So that's where we actually focus. So for our programmable network, the first use case was interconnecting data centers and actually interconnecting clouds. So really starting from the bottom of that and making sure that we could get to where customers really wanted to get their compute from, where they wanted to run their applications, and then more importantly, you start thinking about where they want their data. And so how do they get their data from different spots? And then that runs into a bunch of different aspects of issues, right? You get to the point of, one, just how do I access that data? But then you start running into sovereignty issues. If you look at some of the GDPR and what you do around security around that, and how do you automate all those processes in? And again, giving that customer that feel, or the end user the feel that, hey, it's my data for one, it's protected and secure, and it doesn't matter where it is. I can get to it. I can use the right pieces. I can use the right analytics on it. I can actually go drive the change that I want. So how do you do that? So really what we're trying to focus on, again, is actually automating that entire network layer. Obviously, as I said, the cloud stuff is automated, so getting that connectivity into it, but we really want to jump across that, and this is the work that we're starting to do, where again, that kind of concept of an application-aware network, where we are actually automating the network into the application layers. We actually have it within the data fabrics and the data lakes, so the needs of the application, the data, which is really the two things that are driving business today and they're driving digital transformation, again, are actually the ones that are driving the network usage and how it uses the network. And so, with that, just kind of, one use case on it. So if you look at it today, is where we have it today is that, for us, which is, someone is doing you think about someone doing a data center to data center backup job or data center to data center cloud connectivity. So if they don't want to go on the internet, which you usually don't want to do for that because it's usually some pretty sensitive stuff, in today's world, you're getting a private connection, whether an MPLS or an EPL, taking 20, 30 days to deliver it. This might be for a backup job that runs every night, runs every weekend, depending on what you're doing. And you're kind of estimating what the size of that backup is going to be for the next year or 2 years or 3 years. You're getting a contract. It takes us 30 days to put in. And that sits idly for about 90% of the time. And then what you're still doing is you're still syncing up those servers, syncing up those workloads, making sure everything dumps in. So with the programmable network today, what we're doing now is actually with those customers, and we have a few of our customers doing it, is they have that they've written their backup applications into the API set of the Telstra programmable network. And so then what it is the backup job actually calls to the network, tells the network to spin up whatever that amount of data that they got to transfer for whatever period of time is, opens the pipe, they shift the data, fully secure layer 2, dump it down. And where we actually want to take that, and this is a building block that we're working on, and now as we're starting to get all that telemetry back and all that data, and we've been capturing it now with customers 2-3 years, is how do we start applying machine learning and AI that we can actually give the customer tools where you can even get to the point of, I actually operate in a Google Cloud and an Amazon Cloud in this region, where the application can actually start saying, or the AI in the network can start saying, well, based on these characteristics, you should be on that cloud in London. Or based on the fact that this has a data sovereignty issue, I can't actually move that or replicate that. So how do you actually build those frameworks in, again, where the network's just acting as this almost automated traffic cop to really secure your data, get your applications, get your use cases to where you need to be. And so that's where we really see the benefit. The journey on it is quite difficult. I think we're still early days. But really, this is what unlocks all those new tools, all those new trends.